2 years ago, I thought it would be funny to pull a prank on my friend who was going through a rough breakup. I figured a surprise would cheer her up, so I decided to dress up in a killer clown costume and show up at her apartment unannounced. I went all out for the prank. I visited a costume store and got myself a scream mask, a fake knife, fake blood, and a clown costume painted in eerie white. I imagined her laughing at the absurdity of it all, so I didn't think twice about it. When I arrived at her apartment, she buzzed me in, just as I'd planned. As soon as I got into the elevator, I quickly changed into my costume, getting ready to make my grand entrance. I reached her floor and noticed the door was slightly open. Taking that as an opportunity to be extra dramatic, I kicked it open and burst inside, singing "Hello, my baby" as loud as I could, thinking she'd immediately recognize me and start laughing. To my horror, the person who stood in front of me wasn't my friend. A woman I'd never seen before stood there, frozen, and within seconds, she began screaming at the top of her lungs. Before I could explain or even process what was happening, a man rushed out of the bedroom, clearly alarmed. Without missing a beat, he grabbed a hunting knife from the kitchen and started moving toward me with deadly intent. Panicking, I sprinted back to the elevator as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. Once inside, I scrambled to change back into my regular clothes, hoping to somehow salvage the situation. When I reached the ground floor, I hurriedly stepped outside, my mind still racing. But instead of relief, I was met with the flashing lights of 3 cop cars parked out front. One of the officers immediately spotted me, noticing the fake blood I hadn't wiped off completely. "What's in the bag?" I heard one of them shout. My heart sank. I prayed the chaos would be over soon, but fate had other ideas. Another officer spotted me and barked. "Stop right there," I froze, too shocked to move. I could see the cops approaching, their faces hard and unyielding. There was no escaping this. "What's in the bag?" one of the officers demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. I tried to explain, saying, "It's just a costume," but the officer cut me off sharply. "Step away from the bag now." Fear surged through me as I slowly backed away. It felt like each step took an eternity. The officer carefully unzipped my bag, pulling out the scream mask, fake knife, and the clown costume. His eyes widened as he held up each piece, the grotesque mask and fake blood looking all too real under the harsh streetlights. "What's all this about?" another officer asked, glaring at the fake blood still smeared on my clothes. Desperately, I tried to explain. "It was just a prank," I stammered. "I was trying to cheer up a friend, but it went horribly wrong. I didn't mean to scare anyone." I tried my best to sound convincing, but the officers weren't buying it. The lead officer, his face set in a stern, no-nonsense expression, spoke firmly. "You're coming with us for questioning." Dread filled me as I walked toward the squad car, flanked by officers who took their job very seriously. Every step felt like it carried the weight of the world. My stomach churned with anxiety. The short ride to the police station felt like an eternity, as the city lights blurred past while my thoughts spiraled out of control. What if they didn't believe me? What if this ridiculous mistake ruined my life? I couldn't believe I was in this mess all because I thought a silly prank would be a good way to cheer up a friend. As soon as the squad car pulled up to the police station, the dread in my chest tightened. I was escorted inside, my nerves on edge. The building was cold, sterile, and unwelcoming. They led me to a small interrogation room with a metal table separating me from the officers who would soon question me. The chair they sat me in was hard and uncomfortable, a stark reminder of the seriousness of the situation. The lead officer, a burly man with a permanent scowl etched into his face, sat across from me. He wasted no time. "Name, date of birth, address," he asked, his tone clipped and unyielding. I answered as quickly as I could, trying to keep my voice steady, but the officer's cold, hard eyes made it difficult to stay calm. He scribbled down my responses without missing a beat, his disapproval written across his face. The tension in the room thickened as another officer entered, carrying my bag. He placed it on the table and unzipped it with an agonizing slowness. Out came the scream mask, the fake knife, and the whitewashed clown costume, which now looked far more sinister under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What's all this about?" the officer asked, holding up the mask with a look of disgust. "It's just a costume," I stammered, trying to explain. "I was trying to cheer up a friend. It was supposed to be funny, but I didn't know anyone else would be there." The lead officer's gaze became more skeptical. "Funny? You thought breaking into someone's apartment dressed like this would be a joke?" His disbelief was clear. I could tell they weren't convinced. The officer rummaged through the bag, flipping through the items with a shake of his head. "You know how this looks, right? The fake blood, the knife. This isn't just some harmless prank." My heart pounded as I struggled to stay calm. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to scare anyone. It was just supposed to be a joke for my friend. The lead officer's expression remained unchanged. He continued to ask questions, digging deeper into my intentions and every step I had taken that day. Each question felt like a punch, chipping away at any hope I had of resolving the situation quickly. I explained my side of the story over and over, but it was clear the officers were more interested in finding fault than understanding what had actually happened. After what felt like an eternity, a detective entered the room. He was sharply dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase full of documents. His demeanor was even more intense than the officers. With a brief introduction, he took over the questioning, and I could immediately feel the difference. He had a sharp, analytical look, scrutinizing every word I said. "We've reviewed the security footage," he said, his voice cold and professional. "It shows you in the costume, but it doesn't capture the full context. We need to understand why you thought this was a good idea." I repeated my story, emphasizing that my intentions were harmless, that I had no idea anyone else would be in the apartment. It was supposed to be a fun surprise for my friend, I insisted. I just wanted to make her laugh. The detective took notes, his face impassive, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. His questions became more pointed, probing into my character and past behavior. He wanted to know if I had a history of pulling reckless stunts, if there was anything that suggested this wasn't just a one-off mistake. The longer I talked, the more I felt like I was being examined under a microscope. Hours dragged by, each minute stretching painfully as I grew more and more exhausted. Emotionally drained, I watched the detective leave the room to confer with the officers. Left alone in the stark, bare room, the silence was deafening. My mind raced with anxiety, replaying the events over and over, wondering how everything had gone so horribly wrong. What would happen next? How could I ever explain this to anyone? After my arrest, the following days were a whirlwind of uncertainty and dread. My lawyer, a tall, stern man with a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived to take control of my case. His calm confidence was the only sliver of hope in the midst of the chaos. He immediately began by reviewing the evidence, gathering witness statements, and strategizing my defense. One of his key moves was reaching out to my friend, the intended recipient of my ill-fated prank. At first, she was reluctant to get involved, but after some convincing, she agreed to provide a statement. Her testimony was crucial. She described how the prank had been a joke, a misguided attempt to lift her spirits after her recent breakup. She made it clear that I had no malicious intent, and this became a cornerstone of my defense. However, as helpful as her statement was, it wasn't enough to close the case. My lawyer also requested the building's security footage, hoping it would show more of the context surrounding the incident. Unfortunately, the footage was grainy and failed to capture the critical moments leading up to my mistake. The lack of clear visual evidence meant that proving my innocence would be a challenge, to say the least. During this time, I was held in a cold, cramped holding cell with nothing but a cot and a toilet. I spent hours pacing or sitting silently, consumed by worry. Every day felt like an eternity. The uncertainty of how long this nightmare would last gnawed at me. My lawyer, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to build my defense. He interviewed the responding officers and other witnesses, trying to piece together a comprehensive picture of what had happened. His goal was to show that, while my prank had gone horribly wrong, there had never been any intent to cause real harm. Despite his efforts, the situation felt increasingly hopeless. The authorities seemed more focused on the potential danger my prank could have caused rather than the context of it. My lawyer's attempts to convince them otherwise seemed to fall on deaf ears. The stress of waiting for updates was unbearable, and with each passing day, my dread deepened. When the trial finally arrived, it was nothing short of a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with spectators, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. As I walked in, a wave of anxiety crashed over me. The room was filled with hushed whispers, the clinking of metal, and the shuffling of papers. The prosecution presented their case first, and it was immediately clear that they were pulling no punches. The prosecutor, a man with a commanding presence, delivered his argument with dramatic flair. He painted a vivid picture of the chaos my prank had caused, showing photos and video clips that emphasized the fear and distress I had inadvertently sparked in the apartment's occupants. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor boomed, What we have here is a clear case of reckless endangerment. This defendant's actions, though masked as a prank, were a serious threat to public safety. His words cut deep, making my actions seem far more sinister than I had ever intended. He described the fake blood and costume in such detail that it sounded like a calculated attempt to terrify, rather than a misguided joke. When it was finally my lawyer's turn to speak, he fought hard to counter the prosecution's damning portrayal of me. He presented the security footage, pointing out that while it showed me in the costume, it didn't provide the full context or my innocent intentions. He argued that the prank was meant to be harmless, a joke gone wrong, and that the distress caused was an unfortunate, unintended consequence. Next, my friend took the stand. Her testimony was vital in conveying that my actions had been motivated by humor, not malice. She spoke about our close friendship and how I had intended to make her laugh, not frighten anyone. She reiterated that the prank was meant to cheer her up during a difficult time. Despite my lawyer's best efforts, the courtroom remained tense. The prosecution's dramatic portrayal had made a significant impact, and it was clear the jury was swayed by their emotionally charged presentation. The judge listened attentively to both sides, but his expression remained neutral, offering no clues as to his thoughts.